Hei ja tervetuloa Sopukkaan. Seuraavaksi täällä alkaa Google Finlandin tarjoama AI as a Driver of Economic Growth-keskustelu. Ohjelman kieli on englanti, joten jatkan jonnon loppuun myös englannin kielellä. Hi and welcome to the Nook. My name is Lauri Inkiläinen and I'm your host today at this stage. Next up, we have Google Finland and the discussion about AI as a driver of economic growth. If you want to take part in the chat discussion, there is a QR code on the screen that takes you to the right place. Welcome Google Finland and AI as a driver of economic growth. The floor is yours.
Huomenta, good morning, god morgon. My name is Heidi Jahn and I am Google's public policy lead here in Finland, but I also lead our work on priority projects across Northern Europe. And we're very glad to see so many of you here today. And the topic of our event today is, maybe unsurprisingly, given that we are representing Google, is artificial intelligence. Now, after a short introduction, I'm going to hand over to Niklas Berit Lundblad, who is the Senior Director and Strategic Advisor at Google DeepMind. We're eager to hear your thoughts, comments, questions, so there's going to be a chance towards the end to ask questions. But before I hand over, I want to set the scene a little bit. So let's see. For some reason, here we go. So you will for sure have heard a lot of technology people say AI is transformational and it will transform the ways we live, work, act in ways that we cannot even really imagine. Now, Niklas is going to tell you more about this. But from the outset, I think what is important to emphasize is that with any new technology comes both challenges and a whole host of opportunities. Just like the introduction of cars did back in the days. This required new infrastructure and quite literally rules of the road. And the same goes with other types of new technologies. Now, before we dive deeper into the subject, it's important and good to understand that AI is the holistic term that for any computer system taught to mimic natural intelligence, the one that all of you possess. But as you see here on the slide, there are a number of subsets of artificial intelligence. In the past few years, the subset towards the end, generative AI, is the one that has gotten a lot of attention. Various tools for generating various kinds of content have become popular among the broader public. And this has, of course, sparked a new kind of discussion on the impact of especially generative AI. Google commissioned Implement, a specialized research consultancy, to look into this topic of the economic impact of generative AI. This slide is fairly simplistic, but what it says is that Gen AI can really have a transformational impact, but it's not going to happen overnight, and it's not going to happen automatically. Implement also studied Finland and how it compares with peer countries. And their estimate is that generative AI could really have a significant economic impact. You see the numbers here, a boost to Finland's GDP by 20 to 25 billion euros, 8% GDP boost over 10 years, if widespread adoption is achieved. Now, the gains would come from 3 different sources. And these include the productivity increases from people working together with the help of generative AI, then freed up time from generative AI's automation potential, and then the re-employment of time for other value-creating activities. And of course, delayed adoption would reduce the economic potential. Implement also looked at the various sectors of the Finnish economy and essentially concluded that all sectors should be able to benefit from this productivity boost that then stems from really augmenting workers' capabilities and reprioritizing use of time, which in practice would, for example, mean less time on admin and more time for research and development. The researchers also noted that 75% of AI's economic potential lies in service sectors, while then manufacturing and other sectors can also benefit really from other types of AI. Interesting here is also that key public services such as education and healthcare stand to benefit from Gen AI. Now, the experts also looked at how digital frontrunner countries in Europe are doing in terms of the different parameters needed to achieve this economic potential. And for Finland, you see that when it comes to operating environment and government strategy, Finland scores pretty well, really well, to be honest. But then when it comes to the commercial uptake and areas such as development here in Finland, less so. And then the question of talent is one that always, of course, comes up in these conversations. Now, these challenges are, of course, not unique to Finland, and we are here at the Eurooppa-foorumi, and we know for certain that these questions will be discussed a lot in the EU in the upcoming years. And that means that there's always a risk of kind of not seeing the forest because of the trees. So it's important to also keep in mind what the longer-term vision is. And that brings me really to our lead speaker. So Niklas comes from DeepMind, and DeepMind is a part of Google that is essentially a artificial intelligence research laboratory. They have a very ambitious mission to solve some of the hardest scientific and engineering challenges of our time, working to create breakthrough technologies that could advance science, transform work, serve diverse communities, and improve billions of people's lives. So, without further ado, welcome, Niklas. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes. So what I'd like to talk about today is AI at the boundaries of science. And the reason I'd like to do that is that I don't think in 30 years, when we write the history of artificial intelligence, that we will be writing the history of chatbots. Chatbots have become the mental picture we have for artificial intelligence right now. We think about, Claude, ChatGPT, Gemini, writing a prompt, getting a response back. You ask something, you get a limerick. It's all very fun and great and it's very helpful. And there's real economic value here, as Heidi points out. But the reality is that artificial intelligence has another role to play in our economies and our societies that's much more exciting. And if we want a new metaphor for understanding what artificial intelligence can do in the long term, a better metaphor is that of the scientific instrument. This is a telescope, one of the big space telescopes. And just like telescopes will allow you to see what's really far away, or a microscope will allow you to see what's really, really, really small, artificial intelligence is a scientific instrument that allows you to see super complex things in a much easier way, and also allows you to start interacting with really complex things in entirely new ways. And this is important because this is something that we have struggled with in the last couple of decades. In fact, scientific productivity, the pace at which we produce new scientific breakthroughs, is slowing down. And if that happens, the rest of society slows down as well. Research and development are locked in a complex dance in our modern societies. And unless we have research insights, scientific insights, it's really hard to get development and really hard to get economic growth. So with this image of science, of artificial intelligence as a scientific instrument, as perhaps the universal scientific instrument that we can use to solve really complex challenges, we could explore new areas that will have an enormous importance for the economy. And I want to give you a couple of examples. And I am, I have to confess at this point, unfortunately, a huge nerd. And so the kind of example I'm going to give you is this, folding proteins. And I can hear how excited you are, folding proteins. My God, I've been waiting for this all morning. And you go like, wait, what? So what is this? Why do we care about proteins? Proteins are the building blocks of life. Essentially, anything that happens in you happens because a protein is achieving it. We are bags of water and proteins. You want to cure a disease? You fix the protein. If you want to fix an inherited condition, fix the protein. If you want to make sure that you find a new medicine, find the protein. Proteins are at the very heart of biological science and biological technology. And we know what they look like. They look like this. They're amino acids in a certain sequence. And we have a pretty good understanding of what most proteins are, what they consist of. But the problem is that this doesn't really help us. This is a two-dimensional representation of a protein. And you can see what it looks like and you think, I understand this thing, but then it folds into this, right? This is what a protein looks like, a complex three-dimensional picture. And if you think about knowing this and then seeing this, you realize that if you really want to do something with this protein, you have to figure out what it looks like. The best way to think about it is to think about a Lego piece. If I tell you that a Lego piece has 4 dots, and that's it. That's roughly what we're being told here, right, in the previous picture. I tell you it has 4 dots, but I don't tell you how they're arranged. I don't tell you what the little Lego cube looks like. You don't know what to do with that. You need to know how they're arranged and the 3-dimensional shape of the Lego in order to know what you can build with it. It's exactly the same thing with proteins. You need to know their 3-dimensional form. Now, this is a hard problem. This is so hard that you used to use it to punish biology PhDs. So what you did was you told the biology PhD, here's a protein, go away and fold the protein, come back in 4 years and you'll get your PhD. And so that's essentially what you would do. And it would take 4 years to fold this protein, and then you would have achieved something really important. We looked at this, our science folks looked at this and said, I wonder if there's a way for us to apply deep learning, reinforcement learning, different kinds of artificial intelligence techniques to accelerate the pace at which we solve this problem. And we built something that we call AlphaFold. AlphaFold is essentially a search engine for 3-dimensional structures of proteins. So you write the protein in, you get a 3-dimensional structure. We published this a few years back with 200 million proteins folded in the first iteration. We've gone much further since and just launched the 3rd revision that also looks at biological interaction design, like how different proteins interact. And when you actually search this, you get the prediction, the green, the actual protein, the blue, and you can start to compare them and you see how well they match. You also get the kind of confidence that the machine has that this works. Now, this is interesting because if we go back to the question of scientific productivity and start thinking about this, we go like, okay, it used to take 4 years to fold a protein. They folded 200 million proteins. So 4 times 200 million, that's 800 million years. That's a lot. And even if I'm off by a factor of 10, that's still a lot, because then it's like tens of millions of years of progress in science that was produced by applying artificial intelligence to a well-structured problem in a very short time. So this is the real promise, we would argue, of artificial intelligence, the acceleration of scientific discovery. And it's now being used, because we open sourced it by 1.8 million scientists across the world, to cure diseases. I went to Spain recently and met a gentleman there who's researching sleeping disease, which is one of the most horrible diseases in Africa. And it's not been sort of looked at that much because, frankly, there's not a lot of people who can pay for the medicines. But with the help of this tool, he had been able to start to map and understand the proteins involved in sleeping disease. And so that allowed him to then start making progress towards a cure as well. And so when we can do this, when we can drive scientific productivity, accelerate it by millions of years, we're going to also see effects overall on the economy. And it's not only protein design, it's plenty of other scientific areas as well. We can apply this to quantum chemistry and find entirely new materials in material science. We can apply it to pure math, and we can find entirely new insights in mathematics. And this is interesting because usually when you think about artificial intelligence, you think about applied things. So biology is a pretty applied science. But in math, we can have the computer play itself to find a better way of solving a mathematical problem. So by using technologies that we use to teach the computer to play video games and chess and games like Go, we can actually have it play math and find entirely new mathematical insights. An example of this was that we recently released a paper on matrix multiplication, which is also really exciting for nerds, but perhaps not for everyone else. And the paper showed clearly that we had one really good method of doing this for the last 150 years, devised by a human being. By just having the computer play itself, we can improve that by 19%, that method, and find an entirely new way of something that we had been sort of struggling with for 150 years. And that's fascinating for many reasons, not least because at the very heart of machine learning lies matrix multiplication. So we're using the technology to build better versions of the technology, and that in turn allows us to progress even faster. Another area that I'll speak a little bit more about shortly is fusion. even in this problem, which is super hard, but if solved would be really important, you can apply artificial intelligence to control the plasma in the core. And then weird things like weather prediction. Weather prediction is one of those things where you go like, well, that's nice. There's going to be a thunderstorm tonight in Åbo, and it's good to know that. But weather prediction is much, much more important than we usually believe. And the reason for that, of course, is agriculture. When you actually when you sort of go to the fields and when you put out new seed, matters enormously. The weather matters enormously for that, because if it rains, you can destroy an entire harvest if it rains really hard. So what we did was develop something called GraphCast, which is an ability to do smaller weather predictions for micro areas in a much higher resolution with greater accuracy. Again, by applying artificial intelligence to existing weather data. And so across all of these areas, you can improve our knowledge and you can improve what we learn and know through the application of artificial intelligence. Fusion is a special case where if you actually would be able to solve this, it would solve so many other problems. And what we do in Fusion is that we have this problem of trying to control the different kinds of cores that you find there on the right. That's very, very hard for human beings to do, but we have started to show that some applications that we've developed in artificial intelligence might actually be able to do that. And if you could unlock Fusion, you could do a lot of really, really cool things. But again, I also want to bring it back to the current. And not just by sort of figuring out new solutions in energy, you can also do things with existing systems. So one of the things that we've done with our own data centers is we've applied artificial intelligence to decide how they consume energy, and reduced energy consumptions by between 20 and 40% in different data centers. Now imagine applying that to the national grid. Imagine an energy efficiency increase, even at like 10% across national grids in Europe. The kind of impact that would have on climate change. So, in order to do this, we have an entire team that just thinks about choosing problems. And they recently told me a story about this man. This is sort of a test of the audience. Do you know who this is? No, you do not. I did not either, even though I'm a huge nerd. This man in the very fetching hat is the mathematician David Hilbert. So in the beginning of the 20th century, the year 1900, he was really, really unhappy with the progress in mathematics. He thought that mathematics had fundamentally failed to produce any great insights the last 100 years, and he thought that there was no focus and everybody just ran off and worked on problems that weren't important. So he went to the International Math Congress in Paris and presented 23 problems. He said, these are the problems you should work on. These are the problems you should focus on. And they all have the following quality. They are tractable in the sense that we know a little bit about how to solve them. And if we solve them, they unlock entire domains of new knowledge. And both of those things make them what we call root node problems. So our science team works hard with trying to find those root node problems that, if we unlock them, can create an enormous amount of change. Quantum chemistry is one. Protein folding, it is already unlocking disease understanding, drug discovery, protein design, and synthetic biology. And this, my friends, is the holy grail. Imagine if you could test in silico all of the kinds of different things you want to test for medicine. Instead of having to run things in biological time, you can run them in computational time. And that means that you could do experiments. You could do 1 million experiments in the time it takes to do one experiment in biological matter. So instead of having a little bowl with biological matter in your lab, you would have a computer and you would test in it. And you would be able to explore biology at an order of magnitude so fast that you could find insights that it's taken us thousands of years to found so far. So all of these things unlock different kinds of things, and this is what we're focusing on, the root node problems. And these root node problems include things like fusion, because if you unlock fusion, you unlock cheap energy. If you unlock cheap energy, you unlock desalination and free water. So if you see how these things are connected, it's almost like, for those of you who play Civilization, it's like a technology tree. You unlock parts of the technology tree and suddenly you're able to have an enormous amount of social change and economic growth. And part of that is actually about making sense of what we already know. The fascinating thing is that we talk about scientific progress as if it's just sort of finding new things. But one of the challenges we have in science today is that there's so much published. There's so many papers published all the time that it's really, really hard to have any basic kind of overview of it. So one of the things that we have started to do is to look at scientific publication databases and say, okay, what if we train models just on these? And you can ask the model a question. You can ask, okay, what are the undervalued, hit here to neglected ways we can approach the question of lung cancer, for example. And by looking at everything that we already know, we can probably find entirely new insights as well. We have this body of scientific knowledge that we are not utilizing because we can't grasp the enormity of it. We're publishing so many papers. Not all of them qualitative, but these machines also have the ability to sort out quality over time and help us to do that. So the old CEO of Hewlett-Packard used to say, if Hewlett-Packard just knew what Hewlett-Packard knows, it would make 10% more profit every year. And it's so true for our society that if we just knew what we actually really know, we would be able to make so much more progress. So this can be done not just with medical papers, of course, it can be done with all kinds of research papers, mining that of which we've already produced. So what are the insights that we have gotten as we worked across science? What are the things that we have learned about how you structure artificial intelligence projects? There are three things that I would like to sort of just generally leave you with. The first is that you need to have a well-defined problem. You need to understand what problem you're solving. The Research and Development Corporation, RAND, published a paper just 14 days ago, 2 weeks ago, where they looked at AI failures. And interestingly enough, the most common failure was that people had no idea what problem they were solving. Which is like, well, great. and so not knowing what kind of problem you're solving is, I think it's more common than we'd like to admit, right? Because we're all sort of just digging in and we have no idea what we're doing. The other one is readable domains, data. We need to be much more thoughtful about how we collect data as organizations, as societies, as governments. What kind of data do we need in order to learn the things that we want to learn? That's a question that we should ask. The first wave of statistical agencies came about because governments realized that they couldn't govern blind. They couldn't govern without data on what they were doing. Now, statistical agencies need to be renewed. They need to be rethought. And we need to be able to make society readable in a new way with all of the safeguards for privacy built in, but we need to figure out how can we make society readable, because that's the only way we'll be able to materially change it, to make a read-write society that we can work with in a way that can draw on the powers of artificial intelligence. Economic growth is unlocked through scientific progress, through working on these problems, through finding the data, through having the great metrics that we have, and through figuring out how we can try to make progress on some of the hardest problems that we're facing today in climate change, social inequality, pandemics, etc. And I think what we're seeing when we think about economic growth, and we talk to a lot of economists about this as well, is that we shouldn't talk about the noun, intelligence, because we like nouns. Nouns are hard and they're concrete, and we say intelligence sounds really great. But we should talk about what the verb is. What is the verb that's hiding beneath the noun? And the verb here is learning. Ways of learning is going to be absolutely essential to economic growth. Economic growth is a kind of learning itself. And once we can use the technologies we have to boost that learning and learn more effectively, we're going to be able to do many more things, including what our founder, Demis, says, is to explore the known universe to its absolute observable limits. And that's the long-term goal, my friends, to figure out how it all works. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Niklas, for a very inspiring and thought-provoking talk. Now, we have we have even 20 minutes for questions. So unless there's someone who is super eager to kick it off, we have microphones ready here. I'm going to start off with a warm-up question. You yourself have been involved in many work streams around AI safety, and that's a topic that has also come up here at the Eurooppa-forum. There's all kinds of global efforts, the Frontier Model Forum. There was a very high-level AI safety summit in the UK earlier this year where you were as well.
Korea, actually, this year. Again, last year was Bletchley, yes.
Right, exactly. And the question is really, do you think that we will be able, in light of everything that you showed as well, will we be able to also manage the the other part of the puzzle, so the AI safety questions collectively?
Yes, I do. And the reason I'm optimistic is that the people working on this have not been surprised by the safety issue. It's something that's been a part of how they've been thinking about artificial intelligence the entire time it's been developed. From the time when DeepMind was founded, there was a safety team. It was sort of built into the overall idea of how to build artificial intelligence, that you need to figure out how to do the safety work as well. And that's something that we have then worked very closely with governments across the world, the UK, the US, the European Union, to figure out what are the kinds of safety tests that we need to build. And it's a really interesting challenge, actually, because here's the thing. With artificial intelligence, we're building this thing, and we don't quite know what it can do. So if you build a windmill, you have a blueprint of the windmill, you build the windmill, and then the windmill mills like things that does sort of circle. It does what it's expected to do. You follow the blueprint. When you build some of these models, you add a lot of data, you add a lot of compute, and then you figure out what it can do once you've built it. That's a very different engineering paradigm. So this requires us to develop this entire science that we call evaluation science, which are different ways of evaluating the product, evaluating its behavior, evaluating how it acts in different contexts. And that's something that I think is the reason that AI safety is so important, because we now are building technology that's so complex as to force us to explore it, not just before we build it, but also after we build it, and how it interacts with other kinds of technologies too. So we have this entire team of safety specialists, and then we have an entire team of philosophers that also work on this, and ethicists who sort of think about this deeply. And what they're working on together is this notion of evaluation science. How can we build evaluations that thoroughly and deeply try to understand how these technologies work, more importantly, how they fail, and what kinds of safeguards we can build, how we can retrain them in different ways. And there's a ton of interesting insights there. One of the insights that I find fascinating is that a possible architecture in the future, and we don't know about this, so it's a bit speculative, but a possible architecture in the future is you can build one artificial intelligence to check another, which means that you're building these systems of networks that check each other, and you kind of figure out, okay, how does this work then? How do you put a human in the loop? How do you validate the kinds of outcomes if you have two models checking each other? It's an interesting question, and there's a ton of research going into it. But I do feel we're making a lot of progress too. You mentioned the Frontier Model Forum, and the Frontier Model Forum, one of its core missions is to figure out how to make this evaluation science more robust and how to think about it more deeply. And I was one of the founding members of the Frontier Model Forum, and I can say that all of the labs are equally interested in this. No one has sort of an incentive to go off and make unsafe models, because that's not going to help anyone, and it's not going to be conducive to wide adoption of this technology. And it might well mean that we end up in that delayed curve that you showed in your presentation, and that's not going to be helpful either.
Very interesting. That is definitely a completely different way of approaching certain problems than what we're used to. Over to the audience. We have many questions. Fantastic. So I'm looking at the stage managers to support. Please present yourselves before asking your question. So over here, we have in the middle of the...
Many thanks for the very excellent presentation. My name is Tapani Piha, and I have been working on digital health for the last 10 years. But my question is very different. I'm from Finland, but I worked 20 years in Brussels. I worked in English. And I realized that when I was working in English, my thinking was different than I was working in Finnish. Now, my first question is that, have you seen that if you train large language models using different languages, that the results are different because my thinking is different, and actually I had an Italian colleague who was behaving completely different in Italian than in English. And the second question then is, which is parallel to this, is that how can we guarantee that we can train these large language models with smaller languages? For example, that we are very much afraid of some languages vanishing from the earth because there are few speakers, which means that there's little material. So these two questions, are there differences if you train the language model using different language, and then how we ensure that we are treating the smaller languages in a fair way?
Yes, two excellent. Thank you for that. Those are very good questions, and they're hard. I'm going to start with the second one because I think it's crucially important that we document and try to save as many of those small languages as possible. And this is something that we actually recently, but just a few days ago, announced a project in India where we're trying to save a number of small Indian languages and trying to make sure that we collect data on them so that you can train large language models on them. Because as you put forward in the first part of your question, it is really true that the sort of, as Wittgenstein says, the limits of my language are the limits of my world, which means that the kind of language you have impacts your cognition, the ability to think, the things you can think. That has been proven again and again in cognitive science. And so I'm a different person in English than I am in Swedish, than I am in German, than I am in Japanese, etc. So I think there is something really true about that. And it's kind of fascinating because you can even test for it. And one way you can test for it is by asking large language models trained on different language sets what they think about colors. Because colors are differently perceived across different cultures. So if you show a certain kind of green, it can be associated with something in Spain and something very different in Spanish and something very different in, say, German. And so one of the things you can do is you can start to probe these models. And we recently did a very, very, very small test where we checked out one of the large language models we had and backed out from what it thought about colors, what nationality it had. It turned out it was Spanish. We didn't know, which was very funny. And we didn't know really why it turned out Spanish. So there's a lot of really different things there. But I think this is true. And I think that one of the values we risk losing if we all converge on a single language is that we lose diversity of thought. And so what we need to figure out is how can we then build different kinds of data sets that allow us to train on different kinds of languages. And this is being addressed by several governments across the world, actually. So I'm a member of a small advisory group to the Spanish government who is thinking hard about this and launching their own set of Spanish language models. And they're training on the enormous Spanish corpus. They have the advantage of having a large corpus, which again comes to your problem of small languages. How do you build up the corpus? And they're going to release them as open source because they think it's really important that for Spanish contexts, this is done. The same thing is happening in Japan, where the Japanese government is looking at how to do this. And the same thing is happening in some of the, I think it's in the United Arab Emirates, because they believe that culture is captured in language. And unless you actually train on that language, you're not going to be able to culturally communicate. Your cultural intelligence is going to be low, even if your sort of mathematical, logical intelligence is high. So I think there is a real thing there that we're discovering and that we're working through in different ways. And then I think the interesting, the fascinating thing would be if you could ask a model a question and get one answer built not just in Spanish, not translated, but actually built on a set of Spanish concepts, and one in Swedish, one in Italian. I think that might actually be a helpful thing to do in a European context, because you could then get a sense of what the different thought styles look like. And so this is to a philosophy nerd, this is a huge boon, because suddenly we can empirically explore linguistics of thought. We can explore how thought and language connect. And that's something that I think we've just started to do. But it's deeply fascinating and it's really, really hard. The Swedish AI Commission that I'm also on is figuring out how to make a Swedish language model now. My proposal would be to make it Nordic. It would be much more interesting in many ways. But that still would leave some discrepancies, of course, with the Finnish language that is quite unique. And I think well documented as compared to many other unique languages. So there's an interesting question there of how is the Finnish corpus being curated? What is being done to figure out if there is a way to at least build a corpus you could train on and curate that corpus in the future? And then there's the wider question of how we preserve languages for the long term. And that's tremendously important, but we're losing languages every day. And most initiatives to do that are private. There's something called the Long Now Foundation in San Francisco is working actively on this. And they have something called the Rosetta Project, where they have this really, really small disk where they have all of the versions of, I think they choose the Bible, which is an interesting choice. They choose the Bible, and then they have all these different languages in the Bible, which we should have... If that is the case, and I should reserve my judgment here, but I might be misremembering, it shows a cultural choice embedded in the linguistic choice. That's quite interesting. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. So let's go over here, Kristo, and then we take the next to you.
Hello, Kristo Lehtonen from Finnish Innovation Fund Sitra. Thank you for the inspiring presentation, and actually also very interesting answer to that previous question. At Finnish Innovation Fund, we've seen that we have the same position that you have, that it's very important to preserve the minority languages or smaller language areas like Finnish language or Swedish language or any Nordic language. Luckily in Finland, we have something called Finnish GPT, which has been developed originally here in the University of Turku. I wanted to ask you if you are familiar with that. It has, and further models have been developed based on that, including by Turku University and Silo AI companies and so forth. Has 300 billion words. Excellent. Has been trained with. My specific question is this: that at Sitra we have promoted towards the European Union the type of policy that von der Leyen's next commission, so von der Leyen number 2, should take as an explicit policy goal strategic autonomy in generative AI. And the definition for the strategic autonomy has basically 2 parts. One is that we should ensure that companies and citizens have access to an open source LLM in all official EU languages. How do you feel about this goal? And would you consider making some part of the Google Bard's LLM open source in the future? Thank you.
So we have open source systems already. We have released something called Gemma in version, I think we're on version 2 now. And there's plenty of open source initiatives. And actually Google is one of the companies that have released most lines of open source code of anyone, because we had a set of open source computing folks in the beginning who were really enthusiastic about this. But I do think that's a really good strategic goal. And I think that having these LLMs open source available, like the Spanish Alia project, is going to be really powerful. And I think that's something that can then be combined with also working across the sort of transatlantic link. Because my sense is when we talk about strategic autonomy, we often talk about strategic European autonomy, which is probably good. I think the transatlantic link is being undervalued. For many different contemporary political reasons, we've sort of felt that it's a shaky link. But I still think it's a really important one. And I think that it's something that we would like to build towards. And having these be open source also makes sure that you can sort of look at them and avoid that they're being manipulated in different ways, which is one of the reasons the Spanish government is all up for it. I think they can be combined then, and I think one of the things that we're going to see in the future is the combination of commercial and public/open source models in different ways. Because one of the great trends we're seeing is that these models are good at different things. And so as they start to collaborate and we move from the kind of large model-based paradigm to an agent-based paradigm, the collaboration between models will be much, much more important than their sort of individual capabilities. And I think that is something that's going to be more important. And no, I hadn't heard about Finnish GPT, but I will look it up now. Thank you so much.
Very good. We had a question over here, and then I think Jussi was next.
Hi, Tapani Mylly from Business Turku. Thanks for the presentation, and it was especially interesting to see the tree that you showed, the kind of priority list of things to solve first. I was wondering, what's your thoughts on who should on longer scale be able to decide on which problems to solve first or try to solve first? This could be maybe business-driven, or could be society-driven, or could be nerd-driven, maybe.
I fear it might be the third. Yes. No, but I think it's actually a really good question, and I think to some degree it will be driven by private business who think that this is a problem worth solving, and they have the curiosity and opportunity to do so. But I don't think it would be the wrong thing for a society to say, here are some problems that we think are really important to solve. One of the things that we have been thinking a lot about in different contexts and with different governments is this question of how you incentivize different kinds of innovation and research. And traditionally, we've had an allocation model, which means you apply, you get an allocated set of funds, and then you try to solve the problem, and then you come back and you talk about whether or not it was a success. Historically, one of the models that have been less explored, but is more interesting, is the model of the innovation prize. To sort of define a set of problems that if they're solved, the government is going to either buy through public procurement or reward for a prize the building of that particular or solving of that particular problem? And I think it's a super interesting question. If the Finnish government could answer which are the 10 most pressing scientific problems that it would like to see be solved in the next 10 years, in the next 20, in the next 50 years, then it could probably also find an alliance with others. What if Europe did this? If they sort of put up a list and say, here are the big problems. If you solve any of this, we guarantee you a public procurement agreement in which we will put this to the test. And perhaps you make some kind of deal and you say, if you solve it, you get the innovation prize, but you cannot patent the technology, but you need to openly share it. There are all kinds of things here that we can start to do. But it comes back to this question that I sort of try to press on in my presentation, which is you need to have a well-defined problem. And not knowing what the problem is actually one of the greatest barriers for adoption to artificial intelligence. So we need to get a little bit more serious about the kinds of questions we're asking, the kinds of problems that we want to solve. And if we do, I think it can have a focal effect. It can help us take our resources and efforts and focus them enormously. And when we do, we tend to be able to do quite amazing things. We put people on the moon, we sequence the genome when we really focus on things.
It's a very tangible idea for the EU. I think Jussi was next. And then up there, yes.
Yes, thank you. Very fascinating presentation. Jussi Mäkinen from Technology Industries of Finland. And there are actually two major problems in the political guidelines of the von der Leyen. One is the fossil-free future, and perhaps another one a little less noted is actually a question of materials. So we are quite dependent on materials from third countries. Are we allowed to expect some breakthroughs on those lines, with scientific lines, which you mentioned there, on substitutive materials that we now export to Europe? What is your take on that? Are there low-hanging fruits in there?
I think rare earth materials that are really, really hard to get, and the distribution of which are quite uneven across different countries, and I think it's no secret that a lot of them are in China, for example, are hard to replace in different ways. And I am not enough of an expert to be able to tell you if we're going to be able to find substitutes for those rare earth materials. I think we might be able to find new kinds of materials that can help us do things. And I expect that there's a lot of research going into figuring out which kinds of crystals actually are viable. We published a data set recently with a lot of different crystals that weren't known before, and we handed it off to MIT. There's a lot of work to be done still. You have to research it, you have to search through it, you have to understand what kinds of materials are viable. But in there, if we're lucky, there might be materials that improve, for example, the efficiency of a solar panel, or that allow you to build a battery that's 10x more powerful. Just imagine being able to build more powerful batteries in large countries like Finland or Sweden, where a lot of the energy is being lost in transmission. You could suddenly start to store it up in batteries in different ways, and you could transport those batteries, and you could do it, in a way that's sustainable. And suddenly you would have an entirely different energy production mechanism. So if there are materials that can do things like that in there, I think that's also really exciting. But I will be, I think one of the things that we have to teach the LLMs and also possibly speakers at conferences is to occasionally say, I don't know, so I'll do that there.
Remains to be seen.
Yes.
Up towards the, yes, let's see, where do we have the microphone? Yes. And then Mika next.
Hi, I'm Elina Kiskikata from Fakta Foundation. I also work with strategic foresight. Thanks for a very interesting presentation. My question for you would be, what do you think are the skills we should now cultivate in our societies so that we human beings would actually thrive together with the artificial intelligence? So where should our societies put emphasis now if we think about, for example, educational systems, or, I don't know, social policies, or how we view human beings in our society? So what's your take on that?
we have thought quite a bit about this because we're involved in a series of different discussions about labor market transformations, etc. And the answer is somewhat surprising, but also very entertaining. And so the answer to this question, I think, is that there are some skills that we are really, really good at and that are hard to replicate or where we don't want them replicated in artificial intelligences. And the skills turn out to be 3. One is questions. Asking questions is something that we're really good at, and the machines aren't that good at yet. So the formulation of really good questions, and then questions and answers, going back and forth, the sort of dialogue is something that we're really good at. Second thing we're really good at is figuring out what's right or wrong. We don't want machines doing that. We want to sort of have those concerns about morals be something that human beings do. Training ourselves to figure out how to work with morals is really interesting. And the third thing we're really good at is communicating things, to really communicate them in such a way that they can become engaging, that they can become moving, that they can become passionate. And it turns out when you look at these, there are 3 very, very familiar skills. It's dialectic, the ancient Greek skill of questions and answers that was taught by Socrates. It's ethics, the ancient Greek skill of understanding what's right or wrong and the structure of morals. And it's rhetoric, the ancient Greek skill of communicating well. And I don't mean rhetoric in the modern version where it's become something like convincing somebody about anything. I mean rhetoric in the sense that Aristotle uses the term. Because when Aristotle uses the term rhetoric, he says that if there are 2 people arguing, and they're equally good at rhetoric, then the best thing for humanity wins. So for him, rhetoric is the ability to communicate truth, to communicate things that are true and that are beneficial for humanity in different ways. So I would say let's return to the Greek curriculum with dialectics, with ethics, with rhetoric, because those are the skills that are uniquely human, should remain human, and that will allow us to thrive in a world of artificial intelligences.
Very clear. Thank you. Now we're almost out of time, but one short last question over here and a short answer.
A short answer. Oh, yes. good luck with that.
Yeah.
Mikko Salo from Faktabari. Actually, Elina pretty much covered the angle that we are very interested on, but perhaps addressing that one, all fascinating. We are very convinced that the AI is needed and all that, but please do accept that there is a huge risk, as you know. We are in the world of information wars, disinformation, how it can be the deep fakes. We will talk about that in our session in 1 hour's time there. But when you talk all these beautiful things about what we should do about the education, let's talk to one of the most powerful companies in the world. And so what are you going to do about it? Because all these technologies can be weaponized, and we have seen already traces of that. How can you make it an incentive that we use it right? And what is Google going to do about it?
Good question that I have 0 seconds to answer. No, so 2 things I'd like to say. One is that there are some technological innovations that we can do in order to try to combat misinformation. We are investing in a technology that we call Synth ID, which is a way of creating provenance technology. So you can see if something was created by an AI or not. And then we're also driving a lot of educational initiatives where we're trying to help people understand how to use the technology in the right way and help them to learn in different styles. Because one of the promises, if we get AI right, is that you can actually have a personalized tutor that can teach you in the style that is actually yours, and you can ask questions. Experiments we have done are super interesting because when you have an agent, a language agent that you can ask in class, you see that, for example, young women, girls ask more questions because they don't necessarily feel that they can ask questions in an open classroom with girls and boys. They sort of ask fewer questions, but when they get this personalized tutor, they start asking many, many more questions. So figuring out things and ways in which we can use the technology to help people educate themselves, to help them learn new subjects, making sure that we can build technologies that authenticate good content and tell you what content is produced by artificial intelligence. And also, I think, generally trying to improve the overall ability to find new information. are 3 things that we're doing. I don't think this is a simple problem, though. I don't think there's a technical fix. I think we need to think hard about what kinds of institutions we want for the future when it comes to ensuring that a citizen can inform themselves with facts about decisions that are important to them and make those decisions in a democratic fashion. That's never been easy. If you go back 100 years, there was a ton of misinformation. If you go back to the 1930s or 40s, the propaganda levels in society were enormous. And so we've always been in this situation where truth is really, really in a precarious point. And I think there's a really excellent essay from the 1960s about this by Hannah Arendt, where she writes about the very uneasy relationship between politics and truth. And that's always been the case. And we're going to have to think hard about how to make sure that that doesn't tip over. So thank you.
The position now to decide on this one, and EU is trying to kind of make some sort of rules on that one. Will it be applied, or still a business, not an educational institute?
Of course, absolutely. No, and we are. And I think that being a business also allows us to see that in the long term, nobody is better served by the erosion of truth, neither businesses nor individuals. I think society needs certain baseline truths in order to work overall.
Excellent. I'm sorry, we are out of time, but I can give free advertising for Niklas's pod as well, where he spends a lot of time thinking about long and hard about these questions. So if you want to hear more from Niklas, Regulate Tech is the name of the podcast.
Richard Allen's pod. I'm just asking questions.
You're just asking the questions.
Yes.
And if you're interested in the study I mentioned earlier, I have some leaflets here with a little QR code if you want to look deeper into that. Thank you so much for joining us here today. It's been a pleasure, and have a great rest of the week and start of the autumn. Thank you.
Thank you.